It's been a while. Thanks for having me back. Over the last 15 years or so, I've been doing a lot of work with business leaders. For a while, that was when I was the president of a seminary, and so a big part of that was networking with business leaders. And then about 5 years ago, I started coaching executives, and that's been a lot of fun. But one of the things that I run into a lot is we really struggle to understand what our role is in the kingdom. Like it's real easy for us to kind of think of the pastors or the Bible teachers or the missionaries and think about how they're really doing the work of the Lord. But I think that God invites us, all of us, to co-create with Him, bringing life-giving order into the chaotic situations that we find ourselves in, and doing it in such a way that contributes to human flourishing. And I really think that that is the essence of the original purpose of people that is given in creation, and I think it still applies today. So what I want to do in light of the series that's been going on here at Waypoint about being equipped and prepared to be used by the Lord is my goal is that hopefully we catch a little bit of a vision for how any and all of us are actually invited into the work of God. It's not just the pastors and the missionaries who get to do that kind of stuff. Does it make sense? You with me? All right. Nice. And I got a fist pump from Neil. That's awesome. So let me explain how I got to this idea that we're invited by God to co-create with Him, bringing life-giving order that contributes to human flourishing. It's really based on study from the creation narrative. So what I want to do is just start there, and I'm going to highlight some things that are in the beginning of Genesis. As many of you are familiar with, the Bible begins with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. This kind of opening scene. And then God says, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that it was good, and He named the light day. So very, very familiar story. But there's a couple of things that I want to point out that might be a little bit less familiar to us in our culture. First off, in the ancient world, in the time of the Old Testament, when people talked about the creative activity of God, what they were primarily concerned about was the ability to give purpose, or the ability to assign a role or a function or a destiny to something. The ancient Near Eastern creation stories, stories from similar time of the Bible, they speak very, very regularly about how the creative activity of a God is to bring order that results in purpose. And they'll use different language. Like sometimes they'll talk about assigning a function. Sometimes they'll talk about determining a destiny. Or they'll talk about all of these kinds of things. Role, purpose, function, destiny. They're all using it in kind of the same way to express the fact that when they thought about creation, they primarily thought about giving you a purpose. Or giving whatever was being created a purpose. In our culture, we have a tendency when we hear creation or think about creation to think about the making of like physical substance, and that's not really what they were concerned about. It was not their primary concern. in a creation narrative. What they wanted to know was, could God bring purpose, order, and function, meaning into my life? And that is what the creation narrative in Genesis 1 is primarily focused on. So let me give you an example so that you can kind of hear this, this purpose kind of thing. So this is from day 4 of creation in Genesis. God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the sky to separate day from night." Right there, you can hear purpose. Let there be lights to separate day from night. That's a purpose statement, a function statement. And let them serve as signs to mark the seasons, the days, and the years. That's their job, to mark the seasons, the days, and the years. It's a purpose statement, function. You get where I'm going here? I'm just waiting for someone to be like, "No, I don't get it. Can you clarify?" I don't. It's the professor in me. It's like if you spend 15 years being a professor, this preaching thing is just weird, you know? So anyway, let them serve as signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let them be lights in the firmament, the sky. Why? To give light on the earth. Again, we're talking about their purpose, their function. And it was so. And God made 2 great lights. The greater light to govern the day. Okay? That's its job, its purpose. The lesser light to govern the night. That's its job, its purpose. Think about it this way. In our time, when you're unemployed and you've been looking for a job, there's a real temptation to feel kind of lost, directionless, purposeless. Okay? There's someone in the room that I just had this conversation. I am not going to look at you so as to not. But this was planned before our conversation. I just want to say that. This did not come out of our conversation. But a lot of times when you're in that kind of unemployed season and that job hunt, you can feel like, what is my purpose? From an ancient Near Eastern perspective, from the people and place of the time of the Old Testament, that state of unemployment is an uncreated state. That is how they would think of it. It is an uncreated state that is waiting for creation. And creation is the giving of the purpose or the function, the job, however you want to think about that. And so this is what you get in these ancient Near Eastern creation stories. And it is very normal that the stories begin with some description of an unordered, sort of non-functioning state of affairs. A lot of times the description is a watery chaos. And this is exactly what you have at the beginning of Genesis, right? And God's going to create, but the earth is formless and void, and darkness is over the surface of the deep. Okay, that's kind of that can be kind of a weird statement to us, but to the original audience, that would have been like oh yeah, okay, I know what we're doing now. It kind of sets the genre, it sets the tone. They would have been like, I know what kind of story this is. We're going to begin with this watery chaos, and God is going to bring order and purpose and function. So the thing right off the bat that I'm trying to get at is that when God creates, he brings purpose. And in the creation narrative, specifically in Genesis chapter 1, the creation of the world itself is presented as what some scholars call the cosmic temple. In other words, in the original design, God is going to be with his people in creation. And God is the king who will be with his people. And the whole earth is thus the Lord's temple. Temple in the ancient Near East is nothing more than the place where the God lives. And so what you've got is this kind of inauguration text in Genesis 1 of the cosmic temple, the place where God is going to live and dwell with people. And so as God forms the earth and brings the order out of the chaos, what he's doing is he's creating a place where people can live and work and function and have purpose and destiny and really be equipped and provided for to live out their purpose or their function. And that's what he's doing in creation. And so I want to fast forward to day 6 and just take a brief look at the creation of people, asking the question, okay, then what is the purpose of people? And this, I'll start in verse 26. God said, "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness." Image and likeness are terms that are used at this time to essentially refer to like statues. So it's kind of like he's making a statue. And let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And so he creates people in his image. And then after he creates people, he blesses them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves along the ground." And God uses this lingo of image and likeness, or of a statue, because it was kind of a normal thing that at that time that kings would have statues of themselves made, and those statues would essentially function as a way of saying King so-and-so is in charge of this land or this area. Or sometimes they would make a statue of themselves and set it up in a temple so that the king could forever be in the presence of the deity in the temple via the statue. The point is, if all of that's confusing, disregard. The point is that what we're being told when we're told that we're created in the image of God, what we're being told is we have been granted the function or the job of carrying out God's rule, reign, and authority in the world. That's what it means to be an image bearer. We have been given the job, the function, the purpose, the destiny, however you want to say it, of carrying out God's rule, reign, and authority in the world. God is king, and we are his vice regents who get to carry out his will in every segment of God's world. And that includes the household and your place of employment and your place of recreation and so on and so forth. So this is the purpose or the function that we've been given. And part of what I want you to see, or hopefully that I've been able to explain a little bit, is that creation, from a Genesis 1 perspective, is primarily an issue of bringing life-giving order out of chaos. And this is why I say we've been invited by God to co-create with him. That's the image of God stuff. We've been invited by God to co-create with him, bringing life-giving order. That's what it means to create. That contributes to human flourishing. So let's get to that part. How do we know that God desires for us to flourish? I think sometimes, well, I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes my brain can fall into this kind of trap that what God really wants is for us to kind of be refined through suffering, for life to suck, so that we'll look forward to dying, so that we can, so that we can come to wit's end, so that we'll give up and say, "Okay, Jesus, how about you?" And then we get to go to heaven. Like I don't know. Sometimes, like, I just feel like at least I can fall into that mental trap. And so when somebody says something like, God is particularly fond of you, or God desires for you to have life, or God desires for you to flourish, like, what, really? How do you know that? Well, some of it is right here in the creation story and being granted this purpose of creating. Like that is in and of itself bringing life-giving order. But as we move on in the story, and like if you start reading in Genesis chapter 2, what God's going to do is he's going to put some trees in this epic garden. And in this garden, you have a lot of temple imagery. What I mean by that is you have a lot of imagery of God desiring to be there with people. And he gives this purpose, right? This image-bearing, have dominion, carry out God's rule, reign, and authority in the world. He starts it in this epic garden imagery, and he puts a lot of trees in it, and he invites the dude, Adam, to start working the land. And then God says, you can eat from all this stuff. It's amazing. And one of the trees is the tree of life, which is it's a metaphor for what God actually desires for you. God's actual desire is that you have life. And he's like, here's the tree of life. Eat from that one. And the thing is that there's this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God's like, you probably shouldn't go there. Except he left out the word probably. But you shouldn't go there because that is a path to death and destruction. Now, what is it that's going on? This type of literature loves to use analogies. It loves to set these scenes that we're meant to look at and view them analogically in order to understand like what's really going on. So what's really going on is that God creates a good and perfect world that is set up and designed for us to be able to do our jobs really well. And he makes it clear that his desire is life. I want you to have life. Eat from the tree of life. But there's this other thing. And that other thing that gets labeled the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what that is it's us deciding that we know better than God, and we will do our own thing instead. That's what it means to eat from from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It is, thank you, Lord, for your nice advice. I think you're wrong. I've got it figured out better. I'm going to do my own thing in this situation. And the result is chaos. We break the earth by virtue of our insistence that we know better than God. Our insistence that we know better than God what will bring life, that we know better than God what will bring joy in our own lives, what will satisfy us, what will bring purpose, what will fill the kind of deep things in our soul that ache. We think we know better how to take care of those things than the path that the Lord lays out for us. And what Scripture teaches is that God's desire for you is life. Jesus said it this way, I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. The invitation is to full life. And you happen to serve a creator God who set up this world. He knows what leads to life. His ways lead to life and to flourishing. The psalmist says it this way. I've read this psalm. I don't know how many sermons I've read this psalm. I just think it's amazing. It's the very first psalm, and it basically sets the tone for the entire book of the Psalms. Psalm 1. Happy is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. In other words, the person who relies on the ways of the Lord is the person who finds peace, blessedness, and happiness. This person's delight is in the instructions from the Lord. And on his instructions, he meditates day and night. This person becomes like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields fruit in season and whose leaves do not wither. And then this line that I have spent years and years trying to wrap my head around: everything he does prospers. Whew. God's desire is life, and life to the full. And he grants us his word that we might learn his ways, because his ways are very different than mine. He invites us to lean not on our own understanding, but to trust in him, and in all of our ways chase after his paths to life, because what he desires is flourishing. He desires that we might live life, and live life to the full. And what he does is he says, hey, I invite you to take part in this purpose with me. I invite you to create with me. And creating is bringing life-giving order in our situations of chaos. Bringing order out of that chaos such that human flourishing might occur. And that's an invitation for everyone. Not just the pastors, not just those of us who are called to teach the Bible. It's for everyone. I'll give you a couple examples to try and make it a little more concrete. I mentioned before that I've been working with business leaders a lot. I've had a couple of instances where a business owner has said to me, hey, I have to hire unskilled labor as part of my workforce. And unskilled labor basically means that these are going to be low-paying jobs, that working them full-time is highly unlikely to result in a situation of flourishing for the employee. And so the struggle then is, am I like working against the purposes of God if I hire unskilled labor? It's a really great question. And the problem is, if that business owner pays a flourishing wage for unskilled labor, they will quickly find themselves out of business. And so this is the struggle they face. And so we end up looking at something like a law out of Deuteronomy. This is out of the end of Deuteronomy chapter 24. I'll just read it to you. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the orphans, or the widows, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you go to harvest your olives from the olive trees, don't go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the orphans, and the widows. And when you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, same thing. Don't go back over them again, but leave that for the landless vulnerable, is what we're dealing with. And so here's a situation in God's instructions that Psalm 1 says if we delight in them, this helps lead to prospering. Here's a situation where you have the economically disadvantaged, the landless vulnerable, and what it says is you're providing a way for the vulnerable to essentially move in the direction of working themselves out of vulnerability. Now, there's a lot there. It would be an entirely, different set of sermons to explain exactly how that works and how I got there, but here's the point. I'm meeting with, this has happened with a couple different business owners. They hire unskilled labor. They can't raise the wages all the way to where this would be like a flourishing, wow, you're really making it. wage, they'd go out of business, and it's unskilled, and just all of these issues of how do you value this and how do you value the labor? And am I just creating vulnerability by having these jobs in the first place? But if I don't have these jobs, I don't have a business, I can't create other jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And from a Torah perspective, from God's instructions perspective, it needs to be viewed as you are providing a bridge, a gateway from what Deuteronomy talks about as landless vulnerability. You're providing a gateway from the economic vulnerability into eventually the ability to lift oneself out of vulnerability and have economic stability. And you're essentially in that bridge measure zone, like the end of Deuteronomy 24. So here's how you honor God in this situation and bring life-giving order into the chaos that results potentially in human flourishing. You have your unskilled labor jobs that don't necessarily pay this amazing thing because it's like the bridge measure of not going back and collecting all the sheaves, but leaving them for the vulnerable to collect. But you need to be forming pathways within your company that those who are willing can continue to grow and develop into prosperity. And then the conversation becomes about how do we integrate these opportunities for training or for advancement or for movement up the ranks, et cetera, et cetera. This is how we bring life-giving order into chaotic situations that help contribute to human flourishing in a business example. But let me give a home life example. I have a friend whose son, when he was middle school age, was really struggling at school. And essentially, to make a long story short, the issue was that his son had a particular learning style that did not mesh well with the teacher's teaching style. And so there was conflict, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so my friend and his wife, they did all the kind of stuff that you would do if your kid is struggling at school. They meet with the teacher. They try and help explain to their son like how the teacher works. They try and help explain to the teacher how how she could help their son. They ask the teacher, how can we help our son? They're doing all of this stuff on and on and on and on. And this goes on for several months. And the way my friend described it is I just watched my son shrink and shrink and shrink. And he told me finally one day I went, what am I doing? And he switched the kid's school. And his son began to thrive. This is what it looks like to bring life-giving order. We are invited by God to co-create with him, bringing life-giving order that contributes to human flourishing, to bring life. Are you with me? Our sin has broken the world. And too often we underestimate that, or we ignore that. It is our sin. It is our. It's essentially, at its core, sin. Or sin gets talked about in a lot of different ways in the Bible. But if you go back to the Genesis thing, eating from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, you're basically saying, I know right and wrong better than you, God. God's like, hey, here's my instructions. Here's how you can have life, have it to the full. I mean, I made this place. I know how it works. It'd literally be like if someone said, hey, you've got this job, and your job requires a lot of computer work. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide you this really epically amazing computer, state of the art, all the latest gadgets and everything, and loaded with all of the stuff that helps you do your job effectively. you know? And then you're like, if you could, though, try not to spill your coffee on it, right? And then one day, you're like, this is a pretty amazing computer, but I'm relatively certain that if I pour my coffee over the keys, it will become even more effective. That's how silly it is, our sin. That is how silly it is that the Lord gives us his instructions for life. And we're like, I don't think so. And it breaks things. Just like dumping the coffee over the computer will break the computer, our sin, our demand of God that we know better than him, it breaks his creation, and we live in a broken world. And so, along the way, we've been invited to co-create with him, bringing life-giving order, contributing to human flourishing. But just on a real semi-personal level, life's been a little bit chaotic lately for us. Job transitions, kids moving overseas or going to college, or just stuff, right? The kind of normal life stuff that sort of kicks up some chaos. And it's been a little rough. And we're, at my work, my role is shifting a bit to where one of the things that we're doing is launching a Bible and Leadership Research Center that is essentially designed after how do we help business leaders like catch this vision and become equipped to co-create with God, bringing life-giving order in their situations, in their businesses, et cetera. And so just that transition, along with what I believe to be some spiritual attack, et cetera, it's been a little bumpy. And so I want to end with this. And if I'm being 100% honest, I think I'm ending with this more for my own benefit than for yours. But maybe it'll help. The Bible ends with a new creation. It's a creation that we have to look forward to, where God will remake creation and remove the taint of our sin, remove the brokenness that we brought into the world by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We get this vision, and it echoes strongly the opening story of Genesis that we looked at. So I want to just read a few verses. Like I said, I think I'm mostly doing this for a little shot of hope in my own arm. I'll start in Revelation 21. Then I saw a new sky and a new earth. Remember that at the beginning of creation, God created the sky and then separated the waters under the sky so that dry land would appear. He created earth and sky in Genesis 1. So now I see, this is John talking, I see a new heaven and a new earth. For the first one had passed away. And listen to this. There was no longer any sea. Now, I'll admit that when I first read this, it kind of bothered me because I'm one of those people who absolutely loves the ocean. Like, I wish I lived next to the ocean. I grew up next to the ocean as a kid in Connecticut. And so the ocean is, like, deeply meaningful for me. But then I finally realized, this is like, again, analogical, metaphorical kind of stuff. It's not necessarily that I won't ever get to see the ocean again. It's that this watery chaos that we have in Genesis 1 is not there. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of the sky from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Now the dwelling of God is with men, with people, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God, and he will wipe every tear from their eyes." And if I skip up to chapter 22, then the angel showed me the river of the water of life. I didn't read it in Genesis 2, but there's this scene about these rivers coming out of the garden, and it's basically this image of fruitfulness, of abundance, of life. And so the angel showed me this river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. And on each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. You're always in season. It's just epic. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. In other words, no longer will there be any taint from sin. No longer will the world be broken. And that is the vision that we have of the next life. So we are invited by God to co-create with him, bringing life-giving order that contributes to human flourishing. And along those lines, this is weird, but I just have struggled with this, about feeling that I need to do this. But I'm not about to speak in tongues. I know what I'm about to say. It just happens to be in a different language. Yivareka Yahweh, v'yishmeka. Ya'er Yahweh panav eleika, v'yichuneka. Yisah Yahweh panav eleika, v'yasem leka shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And may he make his face to shine on you and give you graciousness, compassion. And may he lift up his face towards you and grant you